And you are now live.
Okay, we're back at House Education, January 29th, 2025. Just continuing more committee discussion as we sort of prepare to dive into the governor's proposal for school transformation, but also what we think we should be doing on school transformation and how we can make all of that sort of happen together. We kind of highlighted a half a dozen bigger issues that have come up repeatedly through testimony last year, testimony this year. And then we just got some, I thought, pretty interesting testimony on just the mental health aspect of things. Not that it was complete with solutions or how to do it any better other than to build houses and pay people more money for the year.
You tried though. You did get the answers from them.
Yes. Ultimately, everything comes down to housing. Sure. That cost of living. I don't know, anybody want to jump in? So obviously, we're gonna get more details. We still don't know what that is. But we could also, we could talk about, I don't know, we could talk about things that we consider to be red flags, red lines. We could talk about, the areas in which we feel we are best equipped to jump in first. Thoughts?
There's something that keeps coming up with those I talk to is in any of the larger district models, whether it be 5, 12, even 20. How does there's this talk of these local, more localized committees that I'm assuming report up to those boards. That is something that people are, I feel like having a hard time wrapping their heads around. Like, how does that small committee still provide or work with the larger group, right? No matter what size.
Let me add this. Would you be prepared, are school advisory committees, that sort of model, is that in Act 46?
Oh, that's St. James Office of Legislative Counsel. Let me look.
I feel like the introduction.
I will just say that concept does not exist in Title 16.
Right, because it would, if it was in Act 46, it would be in session law. Is that the
Yeah.
difference?
And I think more it's like how that will have impact, like
How do they
do it is one thing, but how does it actually have impact further up the ladder? Like, or is it just a voice that's
It's
not
advisory
heard?
in its name.
Go ahead.
It's advisory in its name.
Yeah.
And it always was when we used the concept before in Act 46. And like we suggested, Peter, I don't remember whether we left it at the end. So many things got changed based on feedback from the field. I don't mean the professional field. I mean outside of the legislature. And it was always intended to be an advisory. It's giving advice to local voice.
I know that in our area, after we unified our school governance under Act 46, we created a version of this. I would say it was hard to get people to do it. And there wasn't probably enough capacity in the central office to sort of keep them robust and going. And so I'm not sure they ever really amounted to much.
They were unpaid too.
So with these advisory committees, has there been any direction on how they're gonna be set up? Is it the schools themselves that have the representatives?
We have no proposal in front of us.
I think I heard something somewhere, but we heard a lot of things somewhere, so. But that's another, I guess, question I have is how what are these gonna be comprised of? What individual gonna make up these?
Go ahead.
As a list maker and a taskmaster, I'm worried about like losing time right now while we're waiting for more information from AOE. And I think whatever we get is just gonna have more and more questions, and that's all part of the process. But this session is so short and it goes so fast. And so I'm a little worried about our feeling in a little bit of a holding pattern. And so I'm wondering if there are things as a committee that we could more or less agree are policy directions, kind of to the question Beth kept asking yesterday, was sort of, what are your policy goals? And then we could actually start drafting some of those things. So even if they maybe align with, maybe they don't, with whatever's coming from the AOE, some things we could start working on. Just for the sake of using time well and knowing that the session is gonna go pretty quickly. Some of them might align pretty well with some of the high level goals we see in the agency's plan. Some maybe are just more a result of, again, all that feedback we've heard from the field. I guess I'm sort of anxious to start,
Yeah.
we have to start working on something more concrete and worry about how long we swirl at 50,000 feet.
Yeah. Yeah, and I'm looking for some consensus as to
So I have
what that
some-
is.
I have some ideas.
All right, well, hold your ideas. Let's go
I have a-
down.
I have a question. So, it seems like there, I guess going off the list that Erin shared with us this morning, it seems like there's some consensus that, class sizes and sort of staff, teacher, student ratios are like somewhere in the mix of these solutions. Have we had, testimony to kind of explore, like if we were to develop some kind of guidance, what that should look like? I mean, have we had
Can I hold that
experts come
question?
in to tell us about that?
All right, so from that, I'm hearing some interest also in just the idea of class size minimums. Could I add on to that? Maybe middle school, high school, school minimums?
Right, yeah.
Yeah. Before we go to Aaron, yes.
I wonder a little bit about those limitations when I think about the Northeast Kingdom in particular. There, and we talk about school construction, big picture, like I think we need to bring some schools back in that area. And if we had a school, even if it was a regional school, it still might not quite hit there just might not be that many kids, but that doesn't mean we shouldn't have a school somewhere in a 50-mile radius of where people are living. So I just want to make sure that we're careful to not limit ourselves too much.
So I think to that, if we're gonna dive into class size minimums or school size minimums, once we start kind of have a concept we bring in, I think probably testimony from up there especially, say, how do we get there?
I would say from anywhere it's rural, and because I'm not up there, but I will tell you, it will be hard in some of my areas to meet
Class
the
size.
needs for class size.
Yeah. So then we have to put on our thinking caps and come up with geographic exceptions or whatever it might be.
Do the minimums have to be, this is the number for everyone, or could they be sort of based on like a percentage? Like your minimum needs to be, I don't know, I'm more of a word person than a math person, but like our goal is to get this percentage of your district within.
So I'm gonna say, hold that thought.
Yeah.
And if and when we dive into class size minimums, let's absolutely have that conversation.
Yeah.
And this wasn't what I was raising my hand about, but I would just say I would want it to be centered only first on best for student learning.
Yeah.
At the top. If you're going on class size minimums, you
I'm
should go
not.
first, because I'm not. Okay.
I'm not,
'Cause I'm
go
not.
ahead, you were before me.
Do you mind if I
Yeah.
add? So, especially after our testimony about, governance and all of that, I continue to feel, I guess I'll say even stronger that re-examining the role of the State Board of Education and its duties. Because I'm not of the opinion that it should go away. In fact, I think I would like to see it strengthened. That's at the top of my priority list, I think, right now.
And I think
What's
they-
at the top of
so-
your priority list?
So I'm trying very hard not to define it because I think it's a conversation that we need to have, but there was a time when the state board had quite a lot more power and authority over the public education system that we have in the state. And I would love to explore that and move forward with trying to strengthen that, because I believe it'll strengthen the public education system. Whether that, and I don't think you can do that exclusive of the agency and the secretary and the model that we're operating under today. So that would all be part of it, but truly, I say this leading with the state board because I think it plays a big role and so much follows that, but just putting that out there, high level.
Back to what we landed on last week was, it seemed like districts were at the top of the list last time, and I think a lot of the governance and everything comes from that, and I've heard that there's different maps or thought processes around maps that have been floating out there, so since that has been top of mind, since last week, maybe that is where we start, that will maybe start to slow down. We can talk about a 5-district model, because we know that's been floated, or 11, or 18, or 12, or 30.
All right, you wanna,
No, I think that I had that one on my list in terms of the sort of depoliticizing education a little bit is sort of that maybe one of the avenues, but I would just back up, I think what Kate was saying, I think another like concrete policy thing that we've got to dig in deep is school construction.
yeah,
And you know, that basically any change is gonna require a substantially sort of turbocharged school construction program.
Right.
If we're gonna keep talking about these mythical new schools.
all right, I can, from all I've heard, school construction aid is a missing piece of what we're gonna get from the governor. And, can everybody feel good about us pushing ahead? There's been 2 off-season task force working on this. We've got the outline of a bill. And I think we need to take it up and start moving forward with it. At this point, the money will have to be figured out, but let's at least reinvigorate that conversation.
Can I just add a sentence onto that?
Yep.
We had a conversation this morning about, I can't remember, was it during testimony, about, the role of and responsibility of the school board to recommend to their community about closing schools. And I still believe that is a role of school boards, and they should feel empowered to do that because that is their role. But having this conversation as part of that conversation makes that conversation a lot more meaningful for our communities and our boards. I think that's really important to remember.
I think I would, it's similar, but a little bit different than what you were talking about, in terms of district consolidation, but just consolidation of some costs and services in the name of efficiency and better delivery for kids, and that maybe we broaden our thinking on it a little bit. One, it might be rehashing the BOCES bill and looking through it with a pretty fine tooth comb of, you know, should we have made some things mandatory that were voluntary? Are there things that we put in there that are roadblocks to that kind of potential efficiency and collaboration with them? Or are there other structures? As I think Beth, you hinted at, like, you could redefine in some ways what an SU, are there other structures we might think about? What is it that we think these bigger districts are going to do, and how would they be delivering or saving? And are there other constructs also potentially less disruptive that we wanna consider, especially given that we did create the ability for BOCES to become a thing, but it, this hasn't even been a year.
So I'm gonna just follow up. I totally agree. How do we ignite BOCES and or this idea of redefining SUs as a more understandable way of going to larger scale. I think it's something we should try to follow through on.
I'm just curious if we can get an answer about the specific 5 districts, which do seem to match the community agency district. I don't know if I'm using the right phrase.
We call them DAs.
Okay.
Designated agencies.
The designated agencies, which when I went to NECA, they pointed out to me. So I'm like wondering, I guess, is there a good reason for that hasn't really been explained? Like by doing it that way, we are streamlining services, or?
You know, how we draw the lines, CTE regions has been talked about, DA regions has been talked
Okay.
about. VSBA regions have been talked about,
Counties.
counties have been talked about.
So then that would just be 14 districts if we did that way.
Yeah,
we do
so
counties.
we was talking about combining Essex and Orleans.
Oh,
Yeah,
Yeah, that makes sense.
But that's very problematic because many school districts cross county lines.
They do.
Current school districts.
Right.
You know, this brings up the bigger concept of drawing new lines means that maybe those school buildings are no longer in that school district.
Right.
Depending on where you draw the line.
Work at a school that actually is in 3 different counties.
Sure.
Congratulations. Okay, I'm just spitballing here. In our new place, up in our new place, if we had a Vermont map, and let's say we kind of drew in these 5 places. And it would give us a chance to kind of look at it, look at the landscape. Identify where schools are, right? Which ones are working or not, and that sort of thing. And then, like, I know for me, like, I'm a very visual person like that. And if we can start envisioning it, we can maybe start envisioning the needs in that particular region. Or we identify schools that are unpopulated and we say, well, right, what if we had one here? And this goes to the construction costs. And I mean, I think that this is bigger than 4 years. I think that we could probably say year 1, year 2, year 3, year 4, but we stretch it out and say, these are the things that can happen year 6, year 8, maybe, I don't know.
So the challenge we're gonna keep coming back to is district lines, and is that it maintains the idea that we are starting from scratch. We draw new lines, those are the school districts. We now have to decide where every child goes to school.
Right.
Where we can wrestle with other concepts. So I think about my county, we have 3 supervisory districts, otherwise known as K-12, SUSD together. Well, you could just redefine those as school districts. And then they become part of an SU. And then therefore you just centralize without like redrawing lines, you've centralized that to one superintendent and one business manager and one special ed director for what was 3 previously. So just, and I don't mean that from it would work just like that, but from it would be a modification of a model that we now understand and have, as opposed to like, oh my God, who's gonna decide where the kid goes?
I mean, that sounds
Jumping
great.
votes.
There is no SD in my Springfield
Right,
closest
every
one.
area.
And I mean, outside beyond my county, I can't remember if you guys have an SD. Yeah, but Bennington is, I think, supervisory district, I think, but I don't have any in my county. No, they're all SUs.
Go back to Rob's point of a multi-year thought processes. You could do the redistricting and you say that currently, when this all happens, everybody goes to the same schools. If you have choice, you retain that choice. If you go to Williamstown, you go to Williamstown, right? You continue on as is. And then like phase 2 of the governance piece is working through where kids go, because you can do part of it and then continue on the work on the more nitty gritty, but you know, to figure out where kids go, because they don't have to be, oh my God, where do we send them on day 1? Well, they go where they go now. And then we work towards the next step.
But I think, you know, that's got the issues that Judge Council brought up the other day, whereas if you have a district, which is what that would be, one big district, and different students get different delivery models, that's right for a lawsuit.
And just following this, because I hate that. I think that this is really valid and important. But I was on the education committee when we started looking at Act 46, even before you came, Peter. And we went down the road of looking at maps. And what a distraction that was. It really was. And I'm not going to say we shouldn't do it, because of course we're going to have to do it at some point, maybe if we're going to redesign. But I feel real intense pressure to get our higher level goals in first before we start looking at maps, because I know what a rabbit hole that is, because it brings in everybody from your committee, because you spoke in committee today about your district and the lines, and you're going to leave out that school district. How could you? It just becomes very emotional.
Got it.
And I think staying at maps are very attractive and scary.
All right, so we know we want to dive into, so we'll start taking on kind of the 3 or 4 that we're talking here. we'll dive into school construction heavy, because we are ready to dive into that. We will learn about class size minimums, both the, academic and economic impacts of those. We can talk about school size, minimums for, we can look at all grades if people want to, or we can start off with higher grades, since that seems to be more palatable on everything from opportunity to amount of time in a bus seat. Two,
I'm just thinking about, I like the idea of looking at a map, and I know it can get emotional, and I know this was really tough when we did this with Act 46 and all the other times we've looked at this, but we have to be ready to look at this, because when we look at, we can't really look at what we're gonna do with school construction until we know what the capacity for each district is. Like, what are these, how many students are going to these schools? So when you look at, if there is an opportunity for a merged district, like, we want to focus on maybe giving that building back to a grand list while we build a new school in this district, to accommodate for more students coming in, or what, I don't know what, like, I can't think of a specific example on the state, but I think looking at like the maps, and figuring out those districts, we'll get a better understanding of when we can go into construction. And I think we are gonna have to make some tough decisions. I think that could be on us to make some of these tough decisions. Because if we draw this out as long and we're like, oh, this is gonna be 10 years down the road. The proposal I saw yesterday was $77 million going to pay down rates. How many more years can we sustain it? $77 million is a lot of stuff we could spend. It's coming from the general fund. Where can we spend that money better instead of buying down tax rates? I think that little sense of urgency is something we need to think about. And it is going to be really emotional. It's going to be tough, and we're going to have, I don't want to say winners. I don't want winners and losers out of this. I want every kid to have a better opportunity at the state. So I think that's just my 2 cents on the whole thing. But I think drawing the districts and figuring out population wise where kids are going to go and what works best for each individual district that we're drawing up makes sense to me.
so to your point, I mean, a map is going to be put in front of us.
Yeah, of
First
course.
of all, and we're gonna have to wrestle with, are we gonna take on, frankly, saying these kids go to this school, these kids go to that school? Or are we gonna pass that off on a group that has more time than we do to do that?
And that's part of like what we need to figure out. I think, yeah.
But the school construction bill proposes that to a certain extent, looking at scoring construction projects.
That's right.
Based on a lot of that.
That's right. Yeah, I forgot about that.
I was gonna say one thing, which maybe we haven't mentioned today is do we think it's our job to sort of take a look at the capacity issues that have been highlighted at AOE? And so do we have a plan to sort of help resource them in the ways that the field is saying they need to be resourced to do all this pretty large scale transformation?
So that's gonna be, that's a huge question and issue, and one that's tough to get at. I think we know for school construction, clearly, there's capacity issues. I would say, given the administration, we're not gonna get anybody high level at the AOE to come in here and say, we need more people.
That's right.
And so how we get around that, I'm not quite sure.
Yeah, I was just curious. Yeah, I'm curious as well how we have that discussion when I think, when the agency came in to present Listen and Learn, they were pretty candid that they heard from the field, like part of the reason we are where we are is because of a lack of centralized support and leadership. And so how do we completely overhaul and transform the whole system if that problem persists?
So, having brought that, it's a great point, and having brought that same question to people at AOE, the response that I think we will hear is just to think about is, the whole idea of having scale, 5 districts, is because then that capacity that AOE currently doesn't have, and frankly has trouble providing because the pay scale doesn't match public schools, that capacity moves down into the central offices of the 5 districts, which can pay competitive wages and have those services more on the ground close to where they're needed. That's not what I believe, it's just sort of what we will hear as to why the scale of 5 districts is preferable. Yeah.
I thought about like what to talk about next in detail. And tomorrow morning, we're gonna hear about the foundational formula. So that might, I mean, to me, that likely, I would think unless we all think it's perfect, is gonna would dictate, be a way to dictate our first big conversations over the next 2 days, which leads us into next week, where we're gonna get the governance piece of it, which I would think would dictate there, right? Like.
So we will definitely pay attention to the foundation formula stuff and be involved with those conversations, but the sort of funding part of it really resides within Ways and Means.
I'd like to, I know last session we had, I forgot who came in, but somebody came in and gave us a presentation on kind of the, organizational structure of the AOE. And I wouldn't mind having a refresher on that and how many employees or how many people are working for the AOE right now. I don't have that information, so I mean, going to the capacity, we don't even know how many people are working for it right now.
Gotta start somewhere. So yeah, well, let's, Andy, see if we can get somebody in on that.
But I also do agree with Rep. Tooth that I really think districts is one of the priorities that we have to start with. And it's gonna be one of the most difficult things we decide as a committee amongst many difficult things.
The question is, I mean, obviously, I'm just so overwhelmed by the concept of redrawing district lines and saying which kids go to what buildings. And maybe that's no longer the way they used to go. And making those changes.
Is it possible to do it in a way? I guess this would actually create an extreme amount of chaos, that kids got grandfathered into graduation at the school that they go to.
I think grandfathering is something that is a tool we use all the time.
Yeah,
And we'll have to keep that in mind, especially in high school.
that might soften the
I
blow.
don't think we can leave this to the local levels to try to decide. Can you imagine the chaos and the conversations that would happen?
You mean?
Right, well, I think,
So,
I think Representative Harble saying that if we're gonna make a change like these kids go to this high school, if it's within
oh, no,
30
I
miles.
understand the grandfather, I understand that. I'm just saying that, we're talking about, are we going to make the decisions on the districts, or are we gonna, who else is gonna?
Well, there is nobody else,
Right.
because we were dismantling it anyway.
So, I mean, I think it's going to be up to us.
I think in the district question is, I go back to like, what is the goal? What is the problem we're trying to solve? And so, if the size of our system, the footprint of our system is about the school buildings, and yes, top heavy above that too, but really like is the number of buildings, how does governance changes and district consolidation equate to building consolidation? And it was the biggest aha for me of the entire last session was when a couple people came in and said, the challenge of Act 46 is that it was so focused on governance consolidation, and not on building consolidation. And so that is one of the real reasons that the savings people had all looked for did not necessarily materialize as such. And there was some consolidation, there was some realignment, but it wasn't. So what are the cost savings of a big governance and district overhaul? And then how, on a practical matter, do you get to the scale and the building consolidation part? Because if it's still left to happen the way it is now, we haven't really solved that underlying structural issue that we heard all last year, and I heard was an issue since the 1990s.
Yeah, one of the bigger arguments that I heard for the larger districts is that you get more towns with different socioeconomic levels making the decision for the whole district instead of possibly a Stowe making their own decision on the yes town, they'll say yes to, and not saying Stowe does, but towns that say yes to their school budget all the time create a school budget that they can afford, whereas, so it's the scale and having the different voices up.
So in a sense, you're sort of diluting the no votes or the don't close my school votes
Well, I think
by
that
having a
the,
larger voting population.
I think part of this,
On the budgets.
and I think part of the reason for the scale to what you're saying, and what they will tell you is that they believe it solves potentially the curriculum problem. So that it's not just Stowe voting on a budget and they've got a huge grand list and therefore raise lots of money above the foundation formula. But it would be an entire district the size of Addison, Chittenden, and Franklin counties voting to spend more money and raise above. And that level of scale is at a level that would be allowable under Brigham. I'm making stuff, I'm not making stuff up, but I'm only trying to throw that argument out there because that's their argument.
So we have been making an awful lot of assumptions, not just in this committee this year, but over the last 10 years, I think, about economies of scale and what equates to, what mergers equate to cost savings and creating economies of scale. And when I was working with this committee on Act 46, we were trying to reduce the number of school districts in the state in the beginning. That shifted in the process of deliberating the bill and changing it to, so it became more governance and carrots and sticks. I have evolved since then, and I'm evolving even more since then after hearing this proposal that is so, I'll just say it's a proposal, but it's without so many details. It's hard for me to even quantify this, but I think we need to understand, and this goes to what I think the other overarching thing that we have to keep in mind as we're moving forward with this. We've been told for a number of years that the rising cost of our education system has got to be changed. And I'm not convinced that economy of scale in the way that we've always looked at it before is what's going to save money. I think that there's no doubt that there are some mergers and school closures that will help reduce spending, but having gone through the process in my own local school board about trying to reduce the size of a number of very small school districts, the cost savings was minimal. It really was. But are there larger districts that could be, say, high schools that could be merged to say, and that would be, all I'm trying to say is that there is, the concept of economy of scale is just a concept. We don't actually know what we're going to save. And so the last thing I'll just say about this is going back to the proposal and everything that's on that board, as we're having these conversations, that has to be at the top of everything right now, I think, because I have yet to see anywhere where I can point to say that that's going to save us money. That's going to help my taxpayers, my constituents who are concerned.
Well, so I'll just say, I find myself getting confused and swirling, and I've got to remember to come back to sort of the core things that I hope are true, and that is that 78% of our spending is on salaries and benefits for the people who work in our buildings. And that fewer buildings translates to fewer people, and that's how you save money. I also happen to believe that bigger scale, and especially on the upper grades, really increases opportunity. And so I think you can actually have both.
And I can give you examples of how merging 3 school districts into one didn't change staff size. It literally didn't, and the class sizes were essentially about 18 to 20 per class, I believe. And I don't know what minimum class size looks like. You guys did it last year, I think, talked about it. And I'm talking elementary. No.
Yeah, and see, I'm talking, you could close a number of very small high schools that are staff
That's
heavy
different.
and opportunity for.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
Only by the fact that they are a small isolated high school.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
So I guess that's just something that I have rattling around in my mind. So yes, the cost is in saving staff. And I'm thinking about like the Northeast Kingdom. They're also currently talking about closing our hospitals. And so that's what people do there, is that they work in our hospitals and they work in our schools. So we've just saved the state money, and now we have a whole bunch of people without jobs. So how are we going to support those people? Where does that come out of, and how is the economy better?
And as some people are quick to point out, these are also people who provide the health insurance for a lot of other people.
Mhm.
So, yeah, and then, I mean, it all comes back to, then also we can get right down to, what's the impact on the community when you close a school?
Right.
And so therefore you have to talk about, well, what is the role of the school? Is it just a place to provide jobs? You know,
Well, it's
is
not,
it just a place to provide community, or is it a place to educate
I mean,
kids?
it's not just that, but a society needs to have jobs. Here's a cost saving measure. Why don't we get every kid an 8 hour long YouTube they can watch every day, and then we won't need to hire anybody? Like, right? The point is not, I don't mean that, by the way. But the point is not just to save money. The bottom line is not just the dollar.
No, that's what I'm saying.
Yeah, yeah,
At a higher scale, there could be a lot more opportunities.
Right.
And I don't think we're gonna get a handle on any of the costs until we figure out healthcare. And that's not our jurisdiction.
It's also far more hard to solve than what we're dealing with right now. For sure, at a state level. All right, well, so it was good. I think that we will perhaps reopen our school construction